Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this PGA Live CPD webinar. My name is Stuart Clayton. I'm a PGA Fellow Professional and the Head of Education for Leadbetter Golf. Obviously, the two gentlemen on the screen today have joined us, and thank you for giving your time up, Sean and David. It's fantastic to have Sean Hogan, our Worldwide Director of Instruction, based at the Worldwide Headquarters in Champions Gate, Florida. Sean is originally from Ireland, started his career with Leadbetter in 1994, has coached at all levels, and has worked alongside David for over 20 years now. So Sean, we're delighted to have you today.
Stuart, thank you for the warm welcome, and a shout out to all the PGA professionals back in Great Britain and Ireland, and a big congratulations to my former Irish international teammate Gary McNeil on his great hosting at the British Open, the head pro there at Royal Portrush. So again, wishing you all well and be safe, and we look forward to the presentation.
Yeah, and the gentleman to his side doesn't really need much introduction, but David Leadbetter himself launched Leadbetter Golf Academies over 30 years ago. He's had 26 major champions that he's worked with, over 150 worldwide wins, including 7 number ones, has authored numerous books, DVDs, training aids, is a PGA Master Professional, and I think for all of us in the coaching industry, we owe him a debt of gratitude for what he's done with the coaching industry over the years. And we're delighted, David, to have you and to talk about the topic today of synchronization, the undertaught factor in golf instruction. And I'll hand it over to you to say a few warm welcome words.
Well, welcome, fellow professionals. I hope you're hanging in there. I heard the golf courses are going to be opening up very shortly, courtesy of Mr. Johnson. So that will be a positive. I know it's been very difficult for everybody. Golf professionals, I would say that they've been very hard done by the fact they haven't been able to obviously make a living. Especially if you're a teacher. I mean, this has been extremely difficult, and it's been the same worldwide, so we're all in the same boat. And I guess it's we're looking at a period of time where we've never seen this in the history of the world, so that we are living through history here. And I think the best thing we can all do is sort of keep a really good attitude, and as the PGA are doing a really good job for you, helping you to educate yourself, giving you something back, so when the time comes that you're going to be ready to go. And that's what it's all about. You know, golf. We know golfers out there have got to be really hungry to get out and play. So there's going to be an influx of players, and hopefully you'll be able to get out there and start teaching with certain precautions. Say it's just a very, very difficult time. We could never ever predicted this just a few months ago. So. Well, we've got to make the best of it. I mean, obviously one's health is the most important thing, and so we're delighted to be able to be a part of this program and maybe share a few words of wisdom, some things that we've learned over the years. I mean, it's interesting with golf instruction. I mean, it's come a long way. I mean, seriously, I joined the British PGA when I was 17, so we're talking 50 years ago now. I mean, it's amazing how time's flown. I grew up in Africa and spent a lot of my formative years out there, but then came back to the UK, got a job in the Midlands, and then came over to the States in the early 80s. And so it's been it's still, the fact is that when I joined the PGA, it meant a lot to me. And so I think, you know, they're doing a really good job in sort of trying to educate the members, and it's all about that. I think the fact is that if we have better coaches, better teachers around, we're going to actually help players to enjoy the game more. And then we're not only working with tour players. I mean, very few teaching professionals, unfortunately, they don't necessarily get all the plaudits. The fact is that working with your club member is vitally important, because these are the people that keep the game flourishing. I mean, the tour players, I mean, yeah, that's really the fluff, if you will. But the fact is that the members that we teach, the average golfer, the weekend golfer, what instructionally challenged, whatever you want to term them, it's up to us to sort of help them to play better. And we know that, you know, golf was in trouble before COVID-19, and we know that people were playing less golf, people were moving to things like cycling, etc. And so we have to make the game to some extent easier for people to play. I mean, there's all sorts of obviously things that people are thinking about, you know, whether it be 2 sets of rules for professionals and amateurs, etc., etc. So they can actually build a golf club for an amateur that goes further. I mean, so there's, I mean, things like that. I mean, who knows? I mean, we don't want the game to change completely, but we have to adapt to the times, certainly. So the one thing for sure, if people are playing good golf, they want to keep playing. But also in this day and age, we have to remember that people have less time to play and practice than they ever have in the past. I mean, things, you know, these things here, they restrict us. In fact, you know, I was telling somebody yesterday, whatever, 15 years ago, somebody tried to get hold of you, they'd leave a message in your answering machine. Some of you may remember this, and you call them back the next day. Well, now it's like you know, they want you to return an email or a call or a text or something with the next, you know, 60 seconds. So it's difficult. So you know, golf, as we know, it's a difficult game, and when you're playing more, I mean, it helps, and if you're putting a little time in on the practice tee, that helps. So we have to find ways of being able to teach this game in a simpler manner, which doesn't mean that we don't want to learn as much as we can. We have a saying at the academy. You know, we have 40 academies around the world and over 100 certified instructors that work for us. But you want to learn as much as you can, so you can teach as simply as you can. And also the other statement that we use a lot is we who dare to teach must never cease to learn. So it's fascinating, all the technology that's out there. There's a lot of stuff, but in the end we have to be able to use that technology in a way that it's a tool and it helps us to teach the game simpler, maybe get to the root cause of the problem in a shorter amount of time. And so I think when you look at some of the great teachers of the past, people like John Jacobs, I mean, maybe they didn't have a complete handle on you know, the ball flight laws, for instance, but my goodness, was he a great teacher. So former captain of the PGA, obviously. And so it's I think we have to look at it from a standpoint of a lot of teachers who are really good at their job, people like a Butch Harmon or a Pete Cowan. I mean, they also have great instincts. So we grew up without video, grew up without all the technology. So it was a lot of it was through maybe playing ourselves, being able to sort of pass on that information in a way that you were able to communicate in a way that different types of players, young, old, strong, weak, male, female, senior, junior, etc., that whole gambit of players, if you will, we could actually help. And that's the key, I think, for being a good teacher, being able to have the versatility to sort of change hats depending on who you're teaching. If you teach a beginner or you're teaching a tour player level, I mean, the whole language is completely different. And so, I mean, so it's exciting, all the stuff that's going on as far as, you know, biomechanics. And we have one of our associates is JJ Rivet, who's based down in the south of France, and it's amazing the stuff that he can test out. I mean, through force plates and 3D testing, etc. But in the end, it's like, hey, can we get this player to fulfill their potential? Can we get them hit the ball more out of the middle of the club face? Can we get them a little bit more distance? Can we get them more consistent? Can we get their bad shots better? So there's a lot that goes into it. And I think the exciting thing about coaching and teaching is that there's so many different elements to it. It's not just the swing. Obviously, you've got all the short game aspects. You've got people like James Ridyard, who are specialists in wedge play. You've got Phil Kenyon, specialists in putting. We've got specialists in everything now. And so generally speaking, most coaches have to be a bit of a jack of all trades and know quite a bit of knowledge about a lot of different areas, whether it be fitness or nutrition or certainly strategy, which you can help a lot of your players with to score better within their limitations of their talent level. So it's an all-encompassing profession, and I think one have to be careful that we don't. You know, I've known and seen a lot of coaches through the years who really are very knowledgeable, but they can't communicate. and they've learned so much, and they're trying to get it all out. And so in the end, it's the old KISS theory: keep it simple, stupid. I mean, because if you're teaching a Bubba Watson or a Bryson DeChambeau, you've got to go about it completely differently. And so it's very interesting that we have to adapt to the type of player that we're working with. It's not one size fits all. It definitely isn't. So and you can go on YouTube and you can see a lot of different stuff, and it's quite impressive how a lot of these young teachers are expressing themselves. I mean, I admire them, and they're learning a lot. But it's also important that, you know, theory is one thing, and what we're going to today, we're going to be talking about theory to some extent. But in the end, it's like, okay, how do you utilize this theory? How does it add to what you do? We're not expecting you, oh, hey, that was great, you know, I'm going to teach like David Leadbetter now. I mean, nobody in our organization teaches like me, I can tell you. And we have a philosophy, and it's very wide ranging, and we tried. I hate the term a method teacher. I've never really been a method teacher, although I've been labeled it over the years because I've written a lot of books and worked with people like Sir Nick Faldo, who, yes, he was technical, but he was also tremendously feel-oriented. I mean, when he played, I mean, it was always sort of clicking noises for his rhythm, and feeling it and seeing it. And so he sort of, I think a lot of people thought that, okay, that it was pure technique. It wasn't. It was really very much trying to create the right feel. And that's, if you're a really good teacher, I'll say this, if you're a really good teacher, you are able to turn those mechanics into feel. So a player, when they go out, they're not actually, overthinking, or John Jacobs would like to say, getting paralysis through analysis. And so, he was a coach who I actually took a couple of lessons from back in the day, just to see what it was all about. And when I actually went to the States, John Jacobs was very, very popular at the John Jacobs golf schools, and actually where I went to initially in Chicago, people like Hank Haney and Jim Hardy, who are obviously well known, really, it was all about John Jacobs, and watching him teach, you could see how quickly he was able to get somebody to hit the ball better. Now, maybe there wasn't a lot of substance to it, and that's one of the things we've changed through the years, is giving people a plan that they can work on. And I think that's behooves all of us to give people a practice plan so they know what they're working on, whether it be drills or the amount of time they practice, the amount of short game time they put into their golf games, whatever it may be. But having a little plan rather than just going out there and hitting balls. And remember, it's not just a series of tips. Okay, well, try this. That's the old famous saying. Okay, bend your knees. That's 50 quid, please. So we've gone beyond that now. So that might work out at a corporate clinic or a company day, but not so good if you're actually seeing a member on a somewhat regular basis. So I think today we're going to talk a little bit about just some of the differences and variations, and what are some of the commonalities. So we're going to bring up Ernie Els first of all. Ernie is a player. Okay, Ernie just turned 50. Okay, so it's aging me, because I first saw Ernie when he was 19. I thought, man, what a talent! And I mean, he was a great sportsman. He played a lot of different sports, cricket, rugby, tennis, and which I still believe, for a lot of kids, I still think it's a way to go to make them all-round good athletes, give them good hand-eye coordination, good dexterity, and so on. And so Ernie, we worked on some things, and for the most part, it's interesting. Every time I see Ernie now, which is not that often, he always says, "Hey, I played my best when I was doing this." And so he sort of refers back to the things that we did. And normally speaking, when you're working with a student, those thoughts and keys that you give to a student early on are the ones that you're pretty much going to be utilizing. And you might change the verbiage to some extent. You might give a couple of extra drills in order to give a feel for what you're trying to do. But a swing is a swing. It's got a DNA. And so, I mean, I remember, say, Nick Price. I grew up with Nick Price playing junior golf, and so he loves the game. In fact, I spoke to him just maybe half an hour before we went on air this morning, and he said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And he's still working on a couple of different things. And he's really not playing that much competitive golf now. And so, but the fact is that a player, getting back to Nick, I remember playing with him when he was 12 years old, and he had some of the same swing traits then that he does now. And so, say we do have a certain DNA about a golf swing that we have to sort of take into account. So what we today, the sort of the subject title, if you will, is synchronization, because I believe, you know, there's a lot of different ways to swing the golf club. We know, okay, we can look, is it flat? Is it upright? Is it one plane? Is it a bowed wrist? Is it a cut wrist? Should it be a short backswing? Should it be a longer backswing? Should the left heel lift? Should be is it more of an arm movement? Is it body rotation? And so, and you know, there's certain traits of all these things in players, and so I believe one of the things that all really good players have is an awareness of the club head, even a higher handicap, have an awareness of the club head during the swing. So that awareness, it's a feel, certainly, and you can talk in terms of rhythm and tempo, the commonalities in the swing. But one of the things is when you look at a synchronized swing, if you look at Ernie here, so he's hitting a 5-iron and what's he doing, 3-wood there, Sean, I think?
Driver on the left.
Driver, okay. It's a few years ago, so it's a small-headed driver. But the key being is that if you time a golf swing, that's obviously the ability we have, that especially with the, you know, we can see here with Ernie, I mean, the driver and the 5-iron pretty much get to impact almost identically, and yet we see with a lot of players, you know, the driver may be, you know, the shaft may be lagging quite a bit behind and taking maybe 3 or 4 extra frames to get to impact, and it happens vice versa as well. Players get to the ball earlier with the driver than they do with an iron, and so you look at it, and we look here, the synchronization aspect. If I term synchronization, it's really the coordinated movement between the rotating body and the swinging club. Okay, so the swinging club includes the hands, the wrists, the arms, and so tying those two components together, assuming that you have a reasonable setup, and the setup obviously does determine a lot of what happens in the swing from a balance standpoint. But if you look at Ernie here, it's amazing how when he was swinging his best, I mean, no matter what club he had in his hand, and we talk about good tempo, and tempo really, remember, is not so much speed, although people talk about it that way, but it's really a measurement of time, from the time that you take the club back from the ball, from the time you actually make contact with the ball. So if you look there, I mean, it's really within a fraction of a second that Ernie makes contact with the ball with both clubs. So and so when we talk about the synchronization aspect, we talk in terms of how not only synchronization going back or synchronization coming down. We've seen synchronized backswing and unsynchronized downswing. So what does that mean? Well, synchronized backswing, in my terminology, would be the fact that the rotation of the body and the swing of the club almost reach their completed position at the top at the same time. You can see there's a rotation there, and maybe 1 or 2 little extra frames there through centrifugal force pulling the club, but essentially the rotation of certainly the upper torso, the thorax area, and the shoulders and the arms and the hands pretty much arrive together at the top. And this is the case that obviously it's a little bit shorter with the iron, but the completion aspect is such which now, once the lower body starts to uncork or unwind, okay, that the arms and hands are following very closely behind the rotating body. And so what we see, obviously, it impacts certainly with a lot of good players where, you know, the lower body's completely cleared out of the way, and the arms and hands are sort of stuck behind them and trying to catch up, and the swing path is well out to the right, then the hands have to flip in order to get the club face square. So players are saying, listen, I'm really working hard on, you know, trying to calm my hand action down. Well, remember, that's an effect. A lot of what we see in the golf swing is the effect, not the cause. We see players who say, well, I wish I could have my hips more open at impact. Well, the fact is, a lot of players will consciously slow the rotation of the hips down in order for the hands and arms to catch up. So here's our Joe average golfer here on the left there, and so let's look face on first of all. So we will see here Actually, go down the line first of all, Sean, because I mean it's pretty typical of many golfers that we see that we teach. Those are pretty tented address, no question about that. So we'll just draw a simple plain line here, and we'll see as we take the club back. And you know, I always say, you know, they don't understand it in America, but you know, a takeaway is Chinese or Indian, okay? And so I don't like the term takeaway because you said you take the club back with your hands. One of the let's hold it right there, Sean. One of the sort of core thoughts that we've used at the academies through the years that I've used in my teaching, the dog wags the tail. So the dog being the big body part of this whole thing moves, and as a result, the hands and arms move with it. Most amateur golfers, they're in all probability have a poor grip. They have a lot of tension in the forearms. They take the club back, and we can see they whip it inside as this fellow is doing here, and really no set to the club way off plane here, and then from here, okay, so at this point, and we can see from a face-on point, okay, that essentially that his body rotation, that would not be out of place as a top of the backswing position with his body rotation. But we can see, I mean, so in theory, he should be actually starting his downswing from here. Well, without that a little amount of set and leverage, it's going to be difficult for him to do. So here's the lift, okay, so the lift to finish the backswing, and then, you know, the old sort of over the top move as we go. There we go. That's very typical. And so you know, this player was desperately trying to say, look how early I'm releasing the club. Look where my right elbow is. You know, I'm swinging across the ball. And so, I mean, it's a case really of learning to get synced out to a point where this fella, in order to do that, what would we do? Well, we'd certainly work on his grip and sort of reducing tension, probably narrowing his stance, getting the club set more, probably about halfway back, so he could actually complete his backswing with his rotation. And so that will sync up his backswing and excuse me, create a bit of movement down. So anything to add there, Sean?
No, exactly. I mean, that gentleman was actually an online lesson over the past couple of weeks. Great illustration. I put him in comparison with Trevor Immelman. We got his height measurements and just got him to relax his hands and arms down. As you say, we narrowed the stance. We actually just got him making half swings. And as soon as we got his hands and arms lowered, essentially it flattened the shaft angle. And that kept the club head, as we explained, we want you to feel like you moved away more with your core rather than a high handle tension-filled address, which got the club inside. So as soon as he felt his arms hanging, a flatter lie angle, kept the club head nicely outside his hands with more of a core move away, and just got him making some half swings under an alignment stick. So again, it speaks to maybe, as you say, the root cause started at address, and then the swing emanated from that tension-filled start he had. So getting the setup right, a big part of getting a player synchronized.
Yeah, and the thing, it's really interesting how, I mean, if you actually, you know, there's several different pivot exercises, which we'll show you a couple of, but it's really interesting how you could actually get a player in a very short space of time to make a decent looking pivot motion. In other words, if they fold their arms, hands across the chest, you know, club behind the back, whatever the case is. I mean, there's half a dozen different variations of the pivot drill. But it's interesting how in a short space of time you could get somebody to really look pretty good the way that their body moves. And to me, the body is the key. And then you try to match an arm and club movement with that body motion in order to get synced up. So everything we're doing really, ultimately, is to get a player synced up, however we do it. This is one of the reasons that the A swing came out, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. It was pretty much a commercial name, but it really did help a lot of players because it enabled them to sync up the arm swing and the body motion, which is what, you know, I mean, good players have great ability to compensate. So even if they're not completely synced up, they have a way of being able to make those little compensations, whether they stand up on the ball, whether they lose their spine angle, whether they slow the hips down, or whether they try to speed the arms up, or whatever the case may be. Players have various ways of being able to get the club back to the ball, and the more talented they are, the the better results is going to be, for sure. But so for the average player, getting synced up is really key, in my opinion. And even if the swing is not long, but the fact is that, hey, the rotation of the body, the turning motion of the body, and I don't actually like the word turn. We try not to use that very often, just because of the fact that turning, you can turn your hips, you can turn your shoulders, you can over rotate, and to a point where I'm turning, but they're not creating any coil. So I'd rather have less turn and more coil, to be honest, with a lot of players. And some of it obviously depends on flexibility, and that's another big factor that we look at, where we have to determine body type, shall we say, in order to design a golf swing for that person. I mean, if you've got a barrel-chested fella with big biceps, I mean, you're not going to have a big backswing. So a little short, compact backswing, maybe where the elbows are flared, just using a hypothetical example, may be the way to go. So that's the key, I think, in teaching, is being able to have a toolbox that you can draw a tool out in order to help a player. Because say you might have, I mean, you never say never that well, I haven't seen this before. I mean, we've seen a lot of it, but I mean, there are things that you think, wow, and there are cures and fixes that you can utilize, which actually, at times I've surprised myself, say, wow, that actually worked, I mean, so, and let's face it, in teaching, I mean, if you're honest, there is a little bit of trial and error. It's not, you just don't hit on it straight away. You can hit on the problem and you can see it and you can analyze it and dissect it, but yet the cure, the fix, is not necessarily as easy. So especially depending on the mindset of an individual. Are they kinesthetic? Are they visual? Do they, if you verbalize, do they take that in? I mean, so there's a lot of factors that you have to take into account when you're working with a student. So if we look at this young player here, sure, she's one of your students, you might say, and we see, we do see certain similarities, and a lot of juniors in particular whose legs are strong. They're probably the strongest part of their body, relatively speaking, until upper body, hands and arms catch up with strength. But this is pretty typical. We see as we
there's the young juniors,
synchronization
obviously. This is a young junior. Her first time we captured her swing here. And let me just say this: one of the things we try to do with a lot of our first-time students here, young, old, elite player, what have you, we try to get out on the course with them in that first consultation. Certainly watch them warm up, just talk to them, let them be themselves, organically warm up as they would, watch their activation habits or lack thereof, perhaps. Get them out on the golf course, watch the routines. You can really get a sense of their tendencies when you get them out on the course, the shots that they fear, their go-to moves, etc. So it's very important to get the clientele.
I think back in the day, for a number of years ago now, when Lee Westwood was really having problems, we worked with Lee for, I don't know, nearly a couple of years, I think it was, wasn't sure if I remember. Seems a long time ago now, but he was really struggling, whatever he was, 400 and something in the world. And the first thing, I mean, I knew Lee's game pretty well, but I wanted to see how he thought and how he performed on the golf course, routine-wise and things of that nature, maybe shaping shots and so on. And so, I mean, listen, he's always been a superb ball striker, and consistency at that point, and probably lack of belief was more the issue. So we spent, a good couple of hours on the golf course, just sort of going through things and how he would feel when he was under pressure and so on, because he was in desperate straits back then. It's amazing how good a player he is, and it's it'd be lovely to see him win a major before his career ends. But he seems to be, it's like a good wine. He seems to be getting better with age. So who knows?
Yeah. So go ahead.
Sorry, Sean, can I just jump in? We've got about 15 or 20 minutes, and we're almost at 300 viewers, which is fantastic. But I'm sure there are a lot of questions out there. Right. While David and Sean are going through this, if you guys that are listening want to post some questions in the question box that is on the webinar, feel free to do so, and I'll facilitate them when we get to that point. Thanks, Sean.
And if we go a few minutes longer today, don't worry about it. We're not charging by the minute, I assure you.
No, great stuff. Yeah, so obviously with your younger players, especially in their later early teens and what have you, you're going to have those stronger lower bodies. And they've, we do exercises, pivot drills. In this case, one of the first things we did with this young lady was just do a pivot drill and get her with a broom handle behind her back and got her to change direction sooner. And essentially, that kept the leg work calmer. We just got her to hold the ground through her lower body and just got her to change direction when her left arm felt like it would be a parallel in her pivot. And that was a game changer for her and got rid of a lot of the out of sync luck where the arms run on and the stronger lower body obviously wants to connect to the ground. So she's going to have a great career. She's only just turned 13 and she got great instincts getting the face on ball. And we're just going to help her be more efficient with it and make sure she's having a lot of fun in the process.
Yeah, I mean, you can see obviously the early release there, which is the effect really of the lower body going first. I mean, she probably doesn't have the nous to sort of figure out how to slow everything down to get you can see the hips are almost at sort of 90 degrees to the target at the point of impact. And this is the tendency with kids, obviously. So, I mean, we do things like, one of the great exercises for young players or especially any good player is to actually hit a lot of fairway bunker shots, okay, without burying the feet in, because you can still use the ground, you can still use those ground forces, but on the other hand, obviously you get very, very wary of your balance. It's unlikely to sort of have a quick spinny hip action out of the fairway bunker, so especially if you don't bury your feet in the ground. So let's look at a couple of other players. I mean, obviously the greats through the eras. I mean, Bobby Jones being one of the best, and it's interesting how people say, well, nobody can swing like that. And he does swing the club. He does get it behind him pretty quickly, and a huge rotation there. You know, Bobby Jones was sort of in the period between sort of hickory and steel, if you will. But a great transition. I mean, if you look at that transition, you know, that would hold up today. And even impact.
Yeah.
We look at impact here. Just check this out. I mean, how everything perfectly synced up. The body's rotating. He's got forward lean with the shaft. Right foot is in a really decent position there. He's got pressure in his left heel. And I mean, just obviously a wonderful striker of the ball. So, you know, these guys, a lot of these guys did this by accident, just through talent alone. I mean, somebody like obviously Ben Hogan. I mean, he said, you know, obviously he dug it out of the dirt. Byron Nelson, the great Sam Snead here. I mean, wonderful ball strike. Actually, you know, certainly got to see Sam Snead hit balls. Unfortunately, I never got to see Hogan, but you know, we see Sam Snead with his let's get it there, and we can see that sort of sit down squat there, which enabled him. He took the club a little inside and sort of a little over the top of it. It's just once again very synced up. We can see. So if we hold that right there, Sean, I mean, I don't think you would have heard of Sam Snead if he had a drivey leg action. If somebody said to him, "No, you've got to kick off that right foot and get that right knee in earlier," I don't think you would have heard of Sam Snead, because what that did was really sync up his downswing. He basically got to a point where he's got pressure under his feet. He sat there. He waited, in a sense where he's moving, but he waited so the arms could actually catch up. And as a result, through impact, we can see as we carry on here now, the rotation of the body and the release of the club happen in tandem. So he was asked point blank, how did you get that knee squat? He has said, I had no idea. And if you look at one of the sort of modern players, if you will, I mean, he's getting on a little bit now, but even look at a John Daly. I mean, there's a guy who had a swing, obviously, which we know how long it was, but I mean, his change of direction actually looked very similar to Sam Snead, the way he would actually sit down and squat. So, you know, it's interesting how players do things in a different way in order to sort of achieve the same end. But if you look at Ben Hogan here, who played his best golf during this period, where this is after his car accident. And my belief actually is that his car accident, believe it or not, actually slowed things down with his lower body and helped him to sync up a little bit more. And he got into a much flatter position. If you look in his early swings, early years, a much more upright swing, and he was a big hooker of the ball. And his whole deal really was his grip in order to sort of create more cut at the base of the left wrist, which is very different to what a lot of players are doing these days. If you look at a lot of the players today, you can go back to maybe Arnold Palmer, Lee Trevino, who, if you speak to Gary Player about it, he said, well, the reason they didn't last long was because of this shut face, bowed left wrist position, and you have to be pretty strong to be able to sort of handle it. So, and you look at the players today, and we'll see with players like Koepka and Dustin Johnson, I mean, supreme athletes, and they can make things work. So probably after you won about 50, 60 million, anyway, you get bored anyway, so you don't care about the length of your career. But if you look at Arnold Palmer, they're very bowed wrist. Jack Nicklaus actually went through, I mean, I've seen him at the top of the backswing. I always remember that famous picture of him wearing an Intarsia pullover on the 18th at St Andrews. And he actually had that left wrist a little bit more bowed and the face a little shut. I actually asked him, he said that's one of the things that his coach, Jack Grout, actually worked on with him, trying to get his thumb under the shaft. And that was pretty much was Hogan's secret. He just basically got more cup at the base of his left wrist. And that enabled him really to feel like he could go ahead and hit it as hard as he could with his right side, remembering that he was left-handed and he had unbelievable flexibility. So, but, you know, you can see, I mean, a player like Jack Nicklaus, players like Tom Watson, you know, did get the club across the line. So should a player be slightly laid off? Should a player, you know, have the club pointing left at the top? Well, not necessarily. So what is the commonality? This is what we're talking about. You know, here's obviously Tiger during his probably his best period ball striking wise was, you know, here he is, a little short of parallel. And if it's short of parallel, then hey, if the club points slightly left, I mean, that's fine. So you would probably look at his left wrist there and say maybe slightly bowed, but you know, to all intents and purposes, it's fairly square. Now, when he did work with Hank Haney, it was much more bowed. And in fact, it's interesting, you know, even though he had the club, even had the wrist bowed, he had the club face hanging, and very much like if we look, can you bring Justin Thomas up there, Sean?
Yes.
Justin Thomas is quite interesting in as much that, let's go down the line. And so, I mean, really good ball striker, especially for a little guy. I mean, but if you look at the top of the backswing here, I say he's got definitely can we see the club face? Yeah, I mean, so that club face is pretty much toe down, and he's got, say, a little bit of a bow there in that left wrist. So a lot of it, remember, the bow depends a lot on particularly where the right hand is positioned. If you look at somebody like a John Ram, who actually has a very palmy left hand grip and a pretty strong right hand grip, he gets into a bowed position. But I asked John, and he said, no, Mike, I've had this since I was a kid. So it's not like something he developed. And so the interesting thing is, there we go. The interesting thing is that a lot of remnants of golfers' swings you see. I mean, even Dustin Johnson, I remember seeing Dustin swing when he was 15, and he had the same look. So it's not like, okay, he's developed that. So what tends to happen is that people tend to develop a technique around a particular player. I can think of, say, a Mo Norman. Okay, Mo Norman, those of you that know a little bit about obviously the Canadian, who was a tremendously accurate player, didn't play much in the States, but I mean, he sort of had this wide stance, palmy grip, sort of fairly short swing, quite a bit of lag coming into it, and hit the ball, say, unbelievably straight. But, you know, people developed a method around Mo Norman. Now, you know, he developed that method pretty much on his own from a young age. So it's interesting how players, you know, teachers as well tend to say, hey, you know, this has got to be it, because, and there's always been, go back to, say, Harry Varden, you know, then you've got Jones, then you've got, you know, you've got Hogan and Snead and Byram Nelson, then you've got Nicklaus and Tom Watson, and then obviously you go through to the Faldo and Nick Price and Greg Norman era, and then obviously Tiger, okay, and now, okay, there's a few more that you can add in the mix, whether it be Rory or whoever. So if we look at, let's go back to Faldo just 1 second, and we'll put him next to Stenson, sure. Okay, because Stenson is certainly one of the world's supreme ball strikers. So if you look at Nick, this was actually a little bit of history here. That was back in 1992 at Trial. I think I was somewhere around there watching Fanny stick a you-know-what up as you-know-what. But anyway, it was just to basically, that was a little exercise we did to sort of, because he tended to sort of get his hips moving in towards the ball, the pelvis moving inwards. So he actually pushed back on the club. It's actually in his left hamstring, that area. It's not where you think it is. But see, very neutral position. And if you look at Henrik too, very neutral position. And it's interesting how these guys, a lot of it depends on flexibility too, how much ability you have to rotate your forearm. You know, some players, a javelin throw, I'm sure Steve Backley could get his elbow pretty much up here if he wanted to. But if you look, I remember testing Nick, you know, he didn't have didn't have the greatest flexibility in that area. And so we noticed how the forearm actually, as in Henrik's case, actually matches the spine, where somebody like a Hogan with his flexibility, where his elbow was pointing straight down. So it's really, okay, how do we complete the rotation, maximize the coil going back? How do we sync up the arms with the body? Well, in Nick's case, if he tried to get his right elbow straight up and down, I mean, he would have had a really short swing. And it did get a little shorter as he got older, probably not working out correctly. In fact, we saw a big article in the Mail, I think yesterday, about Tiger wishing that he hadn't run as much. So working out and that aspect of the game is really important to make sure you parallel it with your build and what you're trying to do. Remember, golf specific exercises, I mean, you're not just trying to build yourself up and get stronger. That's not that difficult to do, but be able to have that motion and that flow. So now we go to sort of the opposite. It's the Brooks Koepka, who's a real specimen, shall we say. My goodness, I mean, he is so strong, and we can see the bow, we can see club face at the top pointing at the sky there. And these sort of players really are very aggressive with their lower body. They sort of unwind. Okay, we watch Brooks here. Big drop there, right? Big unwind with the lower body. We can see quite a bit of side bend there as a result. And you normally see that with sort of a player who has more of a shut face. We can see less of that with Henrik, certainly. We can look at the amount of side bend that Brooks has. So it takes a pretty skillful athlete to be able to swing like that. So not everybody can do that. And there's certain naturalness too that certain players have. I mean, to a large extent, even though we may want to make changes and so on and so forth, and I can think back to even some of the players, like a Lydia Ko, for instance, we still kept the naturalness in a swing and added a couple of things into it. And so here's Jordan Spieth, who obviously had a tremendous start to his career. And so if we look at Jordan, he is one player, in my opinion, okay, that is not strong enough to support a bowed wrist. I mean, it works well with his wedges. Obviously he has that chicken wing in order to offset that. So that's one of the ways he's able to maintain that squareness. But he has an unbelievably weak grip, and it's incredible, really. I mean, he has a real issue with his driver. I mean, he can hit it seriously offline. And for a guy who has really good rhythm, you'd look at it and say, hey, I mean, I know Gary Player said, hey, give me 10 minutes with Jordan and I'll sort him out, because Gary Player, obviously a big devotee of Ben Hogan. Even at 84 years of age, he really swings the club really well. And so if we look at Jordan there, I mean, it's like the problem is he seems to have the same sort of release tendencies with his elbow and the separation of his elbow, the chicken wing, if you will, and just really a sort of a curtailed, restricted release. And just everybody has principles and preferences. And my preference is that it's the club face is in a more neutral position where you can go ahead and release it, rather than having it in a shut position and hanging on to it. We know you can do it. I mean, it's been proven. I mean, Dustin does it well. He does it great, obviously. But hey, should he won more than one major? Maybe. And could you put it down to that? Maybe. Now, Rory is sort of somewhere in the middle. Rory definitely is a releaser of the club, and pretty neutral position up top. Here's one of the great swingers of the club who I coach, Rafa Corbeiro. And when I first started working with Rafa, he had a very rounded backswing, very early turn, and he started to understand that if you got the shaft more upright, and this is the one thing that, especially when we talk about the A swing in a minute, that we're not necessarily advocating an upright arm plane. I like to see the left arm maybe slightly above the shoulder plane. That would be, and to me, he's got a beautiful position up top there, club face neutral. I mean, nice angle at the back of the right wrist and the left wrist, and really in a great position where, as he starts down, he can shallow it out and just rotate fully. And so the thing that we did with Raf once again was synchronize it better, because when he had that club very rounded into the backswing and then a lift, I mean, he literally probably had 5 or 6 frames between the completion of his arm swing and the completion of his body rotation. So here's Mr. Rory.
And this is Ben
Oh, sorry,
clients.
Ben Arner. Sorry, looked like Rory from it. There we go. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks for correcting me, Sean. All right. So
No
Ben
worries.
Arner, we know, if you remember, won the PGA, maybe 5 years ago. Really good young player. Really great ball striker. Once again, if we look here, we'll see.
It'd be safe to say, David, be safe to say that more of the club's natural toe hang through the history of the game, going back, you even mentioned Varden, but you look at you look at more of a toe hang player. It seems like those players have more longevity, as you said. They're freed up to release it.
Yeah, and possibly they can work it both ways a little easier. I mean, generally speaking, shut face players are a little more left to right type players, which is fine. I mean, it's a pattern they can create, and so it's yeah. I mean, it is interesting. Once again, even with Ben on, it's the whole theme is gets back to sink, and sink is to me say, hey, whether a player is on a flattish plane going back, if they can complete the backswing in unison with the rotation, their body action through impact there's no real weight. You even look at Rory, he sort of waits halfway down and then catches up again. And so, doing little simple pivot drills. I mean, this is a lady who, obviously, if we look at one of our club member type players who, just a lot of willowy action there, a lot of flexibility there, a lot of, I mean, it looks quite good, actually, but, the problem is she hits a 5 iron, a 6 iron, a 7 iron, 8 iron, 9 iron, all the same distance. So coiling probably was a problem. So, we've obviously created more coil here, much more through the center, maybe a little exaggerated with the straightening of the right leg there, but still gave her the feeling, okay, that instead of, obviously, you can see the head, the rotation there, we're able to sort of free up. And that's another factor too. Make sure when you check your students, just check to see if they're left eye, right eye dominant, okay? Because the head position of dress should be quite a bit different. If you're a right eye dominant player, you want to be with your head sort of almost set slightly, if your head's at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock, but you want to get your head forward somewhere to around, say 7 o'clock. Now, if you're a left eye dominant player like a Jack Nicklaus or a Nick Faldo, then you can get your head actually angled almost towards 5 o'clock, because it's amazing how that frees up the rotation going back.
Yeah, so we have one of our elite amateurs here, Walker Cup player last year from the US, and so this player's tendency would be to get quite flat early with his shoulder plane, lose that connection to the ground going back. So just by having a player, especially if they lose the connection to the ground, have them put their hands by their side, get into, say, a mid-iron posture, and then work the left hand down the thigh going back, down the outside of the left thigh. The right hand goes back and behind. So his normal position, tendency-wise, would be to get separated and flat going back. So right away he's going to feel more shoulder tilt there, a deeper angle, and his...
Yeah, and you can see, just me interject, sorry, Sean, we can see there's a slight tilt even at the hip. So at this point, the left knee slightly lower than the right knee, the left hip is lower than the right hip, the left shoulder is obviously lower than the right shoulder, and it's more what a spiral rotation. It's not. That's why I don't like the word turn. Turn indicates almost like a flat rotation, and that everybody used to say, well, swing level. Well, I don't know how you could swing level if the ball's on the ground. It would be okay if the ball was teed up on about a 4-foot peg, but that's not the case. So this spiral coil, where you feel like it starts in your center, and then as that little exercise that this young man is doing, John Packard, he's doing, as he works back there, he feels almost like he's coiling up into his upper chest, upper back, and then as he starts down, as he starts to separate and builds pressure in the front of his left foot, okay, from there you can see there's almost a dropping, okay, increasing ground force pressure, and then a slight standing up, and which would be more the case with the drivers, certainly. I mean, we can see these ground force pressures, how they work. They go down, certainly with the driver, it then goes up, and that's if you look at all really long hitters of the ball, for the most part, although there's not maybe as much indication of that with somebody like a Brooks Koepka. So it just shows the strength of the man, that he can actually keep that sort of underneath that right side bend, if you will, But most players, we can see, okay, he's going into his front foot here. Now from here, he sort of jumps up. He'll start to jump up on this. And so it's a great way. I mean, pivot drills for people to sense what the body's doing is to me is very, very key in order to get the feeling, the correct feeling of the way that you're using these ground forces. So yeah, here we have a young lady from Korea, Amy Yang, who Sean works with, and this is quite interesting here because she was. If you look at a lot of the Eastern players, how slow they swing. If you watch MB Park, for instance, I mean, very noticeable how slow she swings the club back and gets into a position where, however she does it, she really synchronizes well coming down. So here's a girl that Sean, having worked with, you can explain this, Sean, how you, by actually increasing the speed of a swing, actually improved her synchronization.
Absolutely, yeah. So to your point, a lot of the girls over there, you know, copy some of the slower players. They grow up watching them as younger players. So exactly. So the backswing time here, we saw Ernie Els earlier getting to impact. Backswing was about, say, 3/4 of a second, got to impact in just over a second, 1.1. You can see Amy's backswing took pretty much close to the time it took Ernie to get back to impact, so about 1.1 seconds. And as a result, there's a lot of lift here. And that lift then doesn't quite sync up with the body connection back to the ground. It almost falls, and she has to wait. So she stays very closed here, and that's going to cause her, or had been causing her, to feel very handsy through the shot. So this is in addition to our pivot drill, this is a good drill if you want to work on the outside of the swing for synchronization. So we call this the flow drill. And we're going to have a player like this hit, say, a 7 or 8 or 9 or an off a tee, start the club head just in line with their lead foot once they measure to ball. And it puts a lot more energy in the club head going back. So you can see here, I'll let it play in regular speed. You can see there's just a lot more zip to it. And we actually got her to impact here. You can see the top of her swing, the 0 lift. It completes with the turn instead of lifting off it. And you can see she gets back to impact very neatly without much fall off in 1 second, as opposed to getting back there in 1.4 seconds, which obviously, if we think of it as a 100-meter race, 10 seconds and 9.5 is first and dead last. So in this case, more synced, and that was a practice swing drill we used last year, and she won 3 weeks later in Thailand. So sometimes you can do a drill like the flow drill and incorporate it into a player's routine.
And that in itself changes the technique. It changes the look of the backswing. And if you get it to impact there, you can see at impact she looks decidedly different. You can see she's more open there, and so it's like the body is more in. This is where the dog is really swinging, or moving the tail, shall we say here, where there it looks like the tail's wagging the dog a little bit more. So it's interesting how you can change positions just through various modes, shall we say. So just very quick here. So this is a bit of a sad story in many ways. She was sort of #1 in the world and won, I think, 13 times while we were with her, or 11 or 12 times, whatever it was anyway. And so Lydia Ko, who, was a phenomenal player when she came out, and she's been struggling the last couple of years. But sometimes, we sort of made a few changes here, certainly with the club face. Just felt having a more neutral club face would give her the ability to release the club more and draw the ball, rather than sort of with that shut club face on the left there, slightly bowed. I mean, she was a very straight hitter of the ball, but had maybe 85 miles an hour driver speed. So when we sort of finished with her, she was up to about 95. So that's a big increase. And so it's interesting. Parents get involved. The dad, who was a 100 shooter, didn't like the look of a swing. So very much a case of function over form, shall we say? Okay, or form over function. And yes. We just felt that sort of a slight A-swing approach was helpful. And just to that end, I know we want to get some questions here. To that end, we've got a young lady here. If we can just show her here, Sean.
Sure.
This is an English girl who plays on the US tour, Jodie Hewitt Shadoff. And we'll see here, so she's really exaggerating the A-swing look, where the club head never gets behind the hands. Now, actually, if you go back in time and look at one of my favorite swingers of the club, his name was Calvin Pete, and you can go online and watch him. He's got, I think, 2 parts. I think it's Calvin Pete part 1, I believe. But you can see what it did with Jody was get the club up, get the club in position. Her tendency has always been to roll the club around, get the club face a little bit shut, and then the lower body get too far ahead. But it really put the club in such a great position up. So really, if you look at that position, regardless how she got there, and you could probably say the same with this young new player, Matthew Wolf, who sort of has a sort of, would be a different looking swing. And the fact that, he's always had it and works with his coach, Gigi, who's an internet sensation these days. But the interesting thing is that, that who cares how you get there as long as you arrive there. And that's the thing. So she's got into a beautiful position up top, and really, I mean, she's a really, really good ball striker. It's just amazing she hasn't won out on tour yet. So, but we're hoping. But it's interesting, when you look at, we're talking theory here, and there's lots of stuff you can obviously look at and determine, okay, what's going to help a player. But say we look at the synchronization factor, and even with Jody here, we can see that the swing that she actually makes, even though she feels she's exaggerating it, well, she is in the drill, but yet she gets into a pretty neutral position. I mean, that's what drills are for, right? They're actually to help to sort of eliminate some of the old and bring in some of the new. And so even if they're somewhat exaggerated, it's not that big a deal. So we can say, hey, you're synced up, you've got the club in a great position, you're fully coiled, your body's in charge here. There's no waiting, no hesitation with the body as you change as you get close to impact. So hey, all things are go. And so that's really how we sort of try to frame our instruction within that framework of synchronization. And some people may call it sequencing, which sequencing leads, in my opinion, to the proper sequence of the swing. Whether it be obviously as you change direction, lower body, upper body, arms, hands, club in a sort of a kinetic chain, shall we say. It's all about how you can reproduce a consistent pattern to a swing. I mean, remember, we're dealing with a stationary ball here, folks. Not a moving object. Okay, it's not just hand-eye coordination that's going to do it. So we've got to do some things on a more stable basis, on a more regular basis, just to how should we say, to create that consistent pattern. So Sean's just ending up with a couple of swings here. I think this was when Lydia won Evian a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and
I think that'll do it.
Yeah, I think to that point,
full of confidence, and that's what it's all about. Look, if you can deliver belief to a player, self-belief and confidence, there's nothing going to hold them back. And so, the old thing is, like, I don't think Jim Furyk ever really particularly worried about the fact that the swing did not look, shall we say, conventional. So, and had an amazing career since. All right, I'm going to plug my thing in here, running a little bit out of battery here. I'll move this over just a touch. Okay, all right. Yeah. So.
Brilliant stuff, David. And I think that leads us perfect into one of the questions that was posed by Brian Sparks. We've had numerous questions, so sorry to people watching. We're probably not going to get through the majority of them, but we'll certainly deal with a few that have common themes with each other. So Brian asked, what importance or consideration do you give to the beliefs that a golfer comes to you with?
Repeat that again for me. So I was just thinking about Brian Sparks. Know him well from Staverton days. So hey, Brian, how are you? Repeat that again. Sorry there. So I was just trying to get my iPad all charged up here, shall we say? Okay, go ahead there. Sorry.
What importance or consideration do you give to the beliefs that the golfers come to you with?
Well, look, I think it's, I mean, if a player has certain beliefs and they've grown up with certain things and they just want something, I mean, we know a lot of times, look, players just like things worded differently, a different set of eyes maybe to expound upon certain things. Because look, relationships do get stale. I mean, it doesn't happen very often where like a Jack Grout and a Jack Nicklaus stayed together for life. And it's like players and caddies essentially. The fact is, there we go, back again. And when that happens, I mean, look, I think it's I think the danger is for some players that they go to a teacher and a teacher sort of looked at it and say, yeah, I want to change everything. And I think that's probably what happened with Lydia Ko when she went. So now we can't have that. We've got to get that club on one plane going back. And as a result, she suffered. So, which is sad, because you work really hard on certain fundamentals, and it could be something just minor. It just could be just a little tweak. And so I think less is more. I think we need to just look at things in a way that you don't necessarily sort of have to belittle what anybody's done before, because obviously the player was probably, I mean, whether you like the technique or not, and so I think that's showing versatility as a player, as a coach, excuse me, that you're able to adapt and say, well, hey, you've done this. I mean, I always laugh at the story of Bob Torrance when Paul Laurie went to see him. I mean, so this is not necessarily the case of being absolutely diplomatic, which Bob Torrance was never known for being absolutely diplomatic. And so when Paul Laurie went to him and he was actually working sort of the stack and tilt approach, with some of it, I'm not in total disagreement with it. I think there are players that are leaning more left these days. And I think strength of core, I mean, certainly they're more centered than they used to be back in the day with a Curtis Strange, say. But when Paul asked Bob Torrance, apparently this is how it went, so he said, Bob, so what do you think of the stack and tilt approach, as he was hitting balls with it? He says, "Aye, lad," he says, "you keep doing that, you'll be stacking shells shortly." So so that was a typical Bob comment there. So so we don't necessarily have to get to that extent. And it's always interesting. I mean, to me, it's always interesting to see how different methodologies or approaches or philosophies, whatever you want to see, actually do a good job. I mean, as we said, there's no swings, there's no two swings exactly the same. I mean, I spoke about Adam Scott and Tiger back in the day, but even those swings were somewhat different, even though they had sort of an appearance at certain points of being similar.
Okay, next question from Adam Cathers. Is using tempo drills such as a metronome a great way to sync the swing, or would you say there's something easier to use?
I think a metronome, I mean, obviously it's really good for putting because it's sort of about boop, boop. I think there are some things out, and they used to have a tool or a toy out called, I think it was called Sonar. Remember we had that, Sean? That was really good. Yes. So it sort of made this whoosh, whoosh going back there. I think, one has to be careful about, the thing that we have to be careful of with a metronome is that it's almost like it's sort of back through. Well, we know in a golf swing that doesn't really happen, because as we're going back, we're going forward. So I think the tendency is that, as I've seen in experimenting with metronomes with players with their full swing, is that they almost think, okay, we're going to pause at the top, we all get there and everything comes back together. But it doesn't quite happen that way. We know that in a sense that the lower body is starting to unwind, and with long hitters it unwinds even earlier. So even though the club may be going backwards and upper torso and the arms are completing, but that they have that ability to separate the lower from the upper. So I think a metronome, I think you could use it quite nicely with little chip shots. I think certainly with putting, great. But I would say and we're actually working on a tool right now to actually create this tempo, because it's as if some of you may remember I brought out a teaching aid a few years ago called the Swing Setter, which had metal balls, and it clicked, and it sort of went click, click, and it was interesting how that was almost to do with the set going back and the release coming through. So I wouldn't call it a metronome, but it was a noise that really people in working with the tool, with the Swing Setter, when they were actually out playing, they actually had that sound in their head. So I do think it's the glue that molds things together, the tempo of a swing, and a lot of factors are tied in order to get that right tempo. I mean, we look at say if you go back in the day, you look at a Nick Price, or you look at a fast swing of the club, or and you look at I mean, Dustin Johnson's a fast swing in the club. Matsuyama almost has a slight pause at the top, less than he had, but a slight pause at the top. So I've got this young player from Korea, Im, his name is, who won this year. A really good ball striker. Very, very slow backswing. So there's different ways, obviously, of achieving consistency, and I say a lot of it is brought about through having done it from a very young age.
Great. Next question regarding synchronization from John Murray, who's enjoying the webinar, but he also asks a question: what is the best way, or what are the best thoughts for a player to recover their lost synchronization out on the golf course?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and I think first of all, one of the drills that we use in order to help players with the synchronization, because a lot of players get out of sync in the very early stages of the backswing. Maybe the hands separate from the body, and the club head sort of works out too much, and the hands, with that separation, they then has to retrace their steps and get it back on track again, or they may in actual fact have too much rotation, either lower body wise or upper body wise, or maybe the right arm is sort of separated early. There's various factors that in the early stage of the swing. So one of the things we like to do and get players to hit balls doing, one of our famous drills for synchronization, is to get back to about a halfway position where the left arm is parallel to the ground, where the hands are in the center of the chest. In looking at it, okay, you get the club into the position that you feel you want, whether it be on plane, whether it be slightly steeper, which is our preference. If you look at a lot of the players I've worked with through the years, so the A swing really is just an evolution of what I've always believed in, and I think it's great for amateurs, because amateurs 9 times out of 10 get the club too flat going back. But if you can get it to halfway back, check it out there, then look back at the ball, complete your backswing with your rotation, and then hit it. It's almost like you're just hitting the ball with your pivot. It's like doing a pivot drill, and you're taking all the sort of the danger of the golf swing out of it in the early stages. So you set the club in a perfect position, and even on the golf course, just get it to halfway back, close your eyes, complete, so you really feel the completion of the backswing with your upper torso, okay? And so as you're winding up, okay, as you complete and the lower body starts to go, that should get you back in sync pretty quickly. And it's a great way on the range too to really, I mean, we get a lot of our players doing that drill, and it really does help.
Fantastic. Another question, a little bit regarding the clips of the olden day golfers from Lee Johnson.
Yeah.
He says the clips from the greats almost show a bit more, or a big left heel lift in the backswing. What is your view on the current tendency for far less heel lift?
Well, I think a lot of it, honestly, is the fact that players are so much stronger now in the lower body and the core area. So their glutes, their quads, their core is so much stronger that they can actually wind up without having all that extra movement. You got to, if you look at obviously a Jack Nicklaus, and I mean, say Payne Stewart, if you go back maybe not so many years ago, a lot of movement with the left foot. And so I think the thing is, I've always said that for players, look, if the completion of your turn lifts your left heel off the ground, then that's perfect, okay? And the way it should move actually is the left heel wants to move almost this way. The knee moves out slightly towards the ball target line, rather than sort of the knee a la Bobby Jones there. I mean, there's a lot of timing involved there, and obviously, Jack Nicklaus worked a lot on his footwork, and this was actually due, if you read some old books there, which I'm a big fan of reading old instruction books, Alex Morrison, who was actually Jack Nicklaus's coach at the time. So there were some coaches back in the day, Alex Morrison being a very well-known player and teacher, and so it was all about footwork at that stage. And you got to remember the equipment's so different then too. So the hands, the arms, the feet, trying to coordinate all that. So it just goes to show how good a ball strikers and how talented these players were with that extra movement. I mean, so in my opinion, I mean, if the foot comes up as a result of the rotation, then fine. And if it does come up, just allow that left heel just to move almost forward, so the knee actually moves out rather than moving it in, which actually encourages a lot more hip rotation.
And that links perfect into another question from Chris Nugent is, what would you believe to be the most important half of the body to work on for your average golfer? Would it be the top half that has more the connection with the club, or the bottom half of the body which allows stability?
That's a good question. And I think it's case by case. I mean, I don't think there's actually one way that you could say, well, listen, you know, this, excuse me, well, I'm still out of sight here. My battery's getting a little low here. I guess when you've done 11 of these seminars in about 3 days, you probably, you know, run out of battery at some stage. But anyway, let me just get this going here. So I think the key is, if everybody can hear me still, excuse me, fiddling around here.
Good.
I think the big key really is, if you look at a player, I mean, I think the general feeling is for many players is that they need to obviously stabilize. I mean, we know that. I mean, a lot of wasted motion, whether it be swaying off the ball, whether they be, you know, reverse pivoting. So I would say, generally speaking, that it's the whole body movement. It wouldn't just necessarily be the upper body. It would be a case, I would say, of lower body stability, winding in such a way that, hey, that a player sort of gets loaded into the right side, and say just the simple pivot motions that really, really do help. And then say, look, I think a lot of players would benefit tremendously from making a mini swing with a wedge. Okay, working on wedge play, first of all, is easier. I mean, if you think, I think back to Jeff Ogilvy, all he used to practice was a driver and a wedge, because he felt he could get the technique down with the wedge, and then he just hammer his driver and that. And so I think for a lot of players, I think it's important that they improve their wedge play, which is what a lot of amateurs need to do desperately. But I also think, on the other hand, that they can get a feel for what they're trying to do, because it's almost as if it's like, you know, half to a three-quarter swing. The rotation and the arms seem to sync up there. That's why, I mean, I go back to the old drill that we used for years, you know, with the towel under the arms, you know, just for wedges, that is, not for a driver, certainly, but you know, just maybe hitting a gap wedge or something with a towel under the arms, so you feel, you know, the togetherness, and you can still feel a little bit of the lower body going first, so you could add a little bit of dynamics into the whole thing. But I think it's a general, I mean, you've got to take, I say, case by case. I mean, you can't generalize and say, yeah, you got to work on the upper body. No, you got to work on the lower body. It's like, because I say, you know, you're going to get two students coming to you who are completely different in their approach. Would you agree there, Sean?
Absolutely. I mean, it may be a case student A needs more stability in the lower body, and student B needs to maximize maybe their feel of coil, get rid of some lift. But it's a great question. I think, as the old saying goes, you know, going back, you want a stable lower, you want to maximize the coil in the upper. And as we start down, we want to feel that nice, strong connection to the ground, and everything unraveling from the ground up, hands out. So it's a great question. As you say, it is definitely case by case.
Yeah. Sean, maybe you can tackle this one, and David can follow up. A question from Rupert Hunter. I know at Champions Gate there we do a lot of 2-3 day schools and retreats, and if you were coaching more of a novice or a beginner golfer at a golf school over those days, what would your best tips be around this subject?
Great question. So obviously, look, we like to get to know our clients before they come here, just to give some of the members sort of a sense of our booking. So when a client books in, let's say it's a husband, wife, or 4 guys coming in, we like to get a sense of, you know, their skill level, their handicaps, what have you. But let's take that sort of higher handicap novice type player. That's going to be a very lightly paced course. If they're not really playing much, maybe the lady might be playing, you know, 9 holes once, twice a week, the husband maybe 18 or a couple of 9. So it's going to be a nice light environment, probably a half-day format, I would say, for that type of a player, because standing on their legs for a long period. That said, having them come in, especially for, say, our half-day experience, which can either be 2 or 3 days there, Stuart, the 3 days is fantastic, because each day we can do a little bit of full swing training coupled with short game training, and that really is key for that novice player, getting them you know, getting some good putting, chipping fundamentals, some good pitching, getting them hitting it out of the center of the club face on those, as Dave was talking about, little half swings, so key, and then building up some confidence. And then the third day is really that type of review day where we're working on pre-shot routine, putting it all together, go out on the course, even if it's for 3-4 holes, and allowing them, you know, to really absorb the new themes that they've worked on. So ultimately, regardless of whether it is a novice or a high handicap, you've got to create a plan for that player based upon obviously time available to play and practice on their skill set. But difficult to do in a half-hour lesson. Obviously, those are difficult lessons where, you know, you've got to obviously string them out over several weeks. So I think it's very important for the members here, the PGA members, to maybe get out on the course with your players, get to know them really well, get to know their goals, because they want to play a little better. And if you can create a realistic plan based upon their skill set, the time they have available, you'll create a lasting relationship there, and they'll appreciate it. But that would be our approach. Very comfortable, probably more from the hole back to the tee driven with that level of player, and creating a nice balanced platform between short game and full swing.
Yeah, I think, you know, you have to realize that we're at more of a resort sort of facility, and you know, people obviously at private clubs or public golf courses, for that matter, municipal courses. I mean, you might bring people in from the area, but I think if you have a set sort of outline, and if you've got for the instruction, and if you've got 4 novices together, that's quite easy to do, because you can pretty much all do the same thing to start with. Okay, it's only after a period of time that you need to probably specialize a little bit. But I mean, from a standard case of getting the grip right, getting the posture right, getting the way your body moves, get an idea of maybe some half swings back and forward, getting some ideas on chipping and putting. I mean, you can, as long as you've got 3 or 4 golfers of the same ability. The difficult thing is that when you've got, you know, a pretty good player and you've got a beginner there, and that's a difficulty. And so, you know, we actually do quite a bit of what we call individual sessions within a group, because I like the fact that people come for a more extended period. I mean, I've always been a serious non-advocate of half-hour lessons. That may be okay for a checkup, okay, but it's not any way to learn. Okay, so you need a good probably couple of hours to start with, to go through it, maybe then hourly lessons after that, you know, to really, and if you have 2 or 3 people, which is actually you can make more money from, rather than just standing there with one person all day long, thinking from that aspect. I mean, you give a person a little time to work on stuff on their own, which is important. I mean, if you're standing there for an hour with one person, okay, I mean, it's, you know, time drags, and the fact is they don't need all that information. They only need 1 or 2 things, but they're paying you, so they feel that, well, you should be saying something. Okay, so it's like, as we know, look, I want you to work on that for a few minutes. I want you to do this drill. I want you to hit 20 balls doing this, 20 balls doing that. And so you know, the group session, I mean, it's always been a big problem for years. You know, well, you know, how do we increase our income, and do you like group lessons? Apart from beginners, I don't particularly like group lessons, because we don't teach everybody the same way. But as long as you teach individuals within a group and give them a little time, and they feel, look, if you have a 2-hour or 3-hour session, and it's, you know, have a little break in between, as Sean says, you can go out and do a little chipping, little putting. I think, you know, one should really look at one's lesson plan, and if you've got the size facility where you've got a little bit of room, if you don't, obviously that's another matter. But if you have the room, getting 2 or 3, 4 people, maximum 4, I would say 3 is probably better, where you get them down and you try to find some similarity from a handicap standpoint. And you know, I think it's a way to go. I mean, I say the half-hour lessons. I mean, I remember back in the day, okay, a lot of the young British pros used to go to Germany, right? And they say, wow, we're going to make a fortune. And you saw them driving around in Porsches and BMWs. But I mean, actually, at the end of the season, I think most of them could be declared zombies, because they were teaching from about 7:30 in the morning till 7:30 at night, half-hour lessons to basically an audience that, you know, if they knew which end of the club to hold, that's a victory. Having been in Austria for a lot of years, and we have academies in Germany. But the fact of the matter is, not belittling the Germans in any way as far as their golf games are concerned, but they're fairly sort of analytical, shall we say. And so, I mean, you can imagine, I'd hate to be the last lesson at 7 o'clock. It's like, because that golf pro had to be brain dead at that point. So, you know, I think if you can start to get them into a group, it's actually easier on the professional, and ultimately the student learns more.
Fantastic. We'll take one last quick question before we close things out. We looked at the junior golfer earlier in the session, and Darren Prosser asked, why do so many junior players get on their toes through impact?
Well, I think, there's a power factor here, and we see, you could, if you look, Darren, if you want to go and check out Laura Davies, I think she still thinks she's probably 18, although she's well up, into her 50s now, but she's up on her toes a lot. So we see a lot of players that who do get elevated, and I don't think it's something you necessarily want to curtail initially. I mean, it's one of those things, as I said earlier, you can hit balls over fairway bunker to help with the balance, but it's one of the ways certainly where they extend the spine angle and actually get their arms extended, which allows them to get more speed. And so I think it's a good idea, certainly maybe with a wedge, a 9 and 8 iron, to actually practice these sort of players to practice hitting balls, maybe even with their right foot on the ground, to sort of bleed it in slowly. But when they get into the longer clubs, to me, I'd leave them there, because to me, I don't think you want to naturally destroy anybody's speed and flow. And I think that's one of the ways these kids who, until they get stronger and maybe have a really solid lower body support base, that's going to happen. So, and the other thing is for kids too, which is fun too, get them to hit balls just with their, with no shoes on. And because some of the greats, you go back to Sam Snead, played with no shoes on. Angel Cabrera, the fine Argentinian player, he grew up as a caddy, didn't have any shoes. And we can see Nick Faldo there, it's one of the drills that we did from a balance standpoint. So, and, kids will start to figure it out. If you can actually give them the tool, say, okay, what do you feel different here when you don't have any shoes on and hit balls? And so they may well find that they can stay a little bit more grounded. But, that sort of look where kids get up on their toes, and you actually see quite a few of the girls on the LPGA tour doing it, more so than the men. There are many men, their left foot is even somebody like a Justin Thomas. He's got certainly flippy feet, but it's an interesting one. But I think ultimately we want to encourage movement and flow and power and speed, especially in today's game. And so as long as they've got some good fundamentals, good setup, good grip, and they get the club what you feel is in a good position up top to sync up. There we go. There he is, twinkle toes. So it's you can't say he's off balance. As well as he hits it. He's beautiful lines at impact, left shoulder, back of the left hand, shaft, almost in one straight line there. So yeah, he does get a little up on his toes. But it's interesting how I think I remember hearing Joe Miller, the long drive guy from the UK, who said when he started to try to keep his feet flush, he lost about 40 yards. So, so hey, maybe therein lies a tale.
Yeah, David, Sean, fantastic. And I think that brings us towards the end. I know the PGA and all of the members that have tuned in today and sent questions in, thank you both for being so generous with your time. The PGA have asked me just to remind all the viewers today that the next PGA Live CPD webinar will be taking place next Tuesday at 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. UK time, where they will have members of the education team and 4 master professionals. So you can find out more information on the PGA website, or if you've got any questions, email cpd@pga.org.uk. Along in the webinar with us today, there are a couple of handouts. As many of you may know, we developed the Leadbetter Golf University. I know David's passionate about giving back to golf instructors around the world and creating educational opportunities. There's quite a few free educational courses on there at the moment, and a selection of paid courses that can help take your instruction a little bit further. So check that out at university.leadbetter.com. And Sean, David, I'll leave it to you just to say a few parting words before we close things out.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for being here today. I know it's tough times for you. Hope you learned a little bit. If you can add one little nugget to your repertoire, well, this is what it's all about. And just hang in there. As I say, I feel for for everybody out there. I mean, it's not only in our industry, but every industry is suffering, and say unprecedented times. But it will end, and so be ready when things get back to somewhat of normality. And everybody stay safe and be sensible with your teaching. Don't get too close to people, and see if we can get through this together.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you said, David, and we wish you and your families well, and we'll definitely get through it. Keep the faith, and remember, it's just like being out on the golf course. We got to exercise our patience and keep all that positivity going. And it's probably been a good chance for some of these webinars and for you to catch up on maybe growing your toolbox and knowledge, so you can come back stronger and better than ever. So please do take care, and thank you for allowing us to be with you guys and girls today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks.